today's World Insight. Another Trump impeachment trial at the U.S. Senate. Second time's the charm, the impact on a deeply polarized America and the incoming Biden administration. And chaotic transition of power in the U.S. What does it mean for the rest of the world? Answers from Kishore Mahbubani, a Singaporean diplomat and scholar.
And this is, of course, the saddest reality of the United States.
Here is our host, Tian Wei.
This is World Insight, and I'm Tian Wei. The program coming to you live from Beijing. We start with a look at the latest on the aftermath of the mob assault on the U.S. Capitol. After U.S. Vice President Mike Pence refused to invoke the 25th Amendment to sideline President Donald Trump, he was impeached again this Wednesday by the U.S. House. Mr. Trump is the first U.S. president to be impeached twice after being charged with incitement of insurrection. 10 Republicans joined Democrats in a 232 to 197 bipartisan vote to impeach Trump. In a video statement after his impeachment, the U.S. president appealed to his supporters to refrain from violence or disruption during the transition of power. So, what's next after the U.S. House impeachment vote? Could an impeachment hearing at the Senate weigh down Biden's first days in office? Let's loop in our panelists. More on Trump impeachment. Join us in Chapel Hill, Klaus Laris, Distinguished Professor of History and International Affairs at the University of North Carolina. Good to see you, sir. In Washington, D.C., Brandon Andrews, entrepreneur and former Hill staffer. Good to see you as well, Brandon. Last but not least, in Beijing, Yang Xiyu, Senior Research Fellow, China Institute of International Studies. Welcome as well, Mr. Yang. Let me start by asking the two guests now in the U.S., Professor Laris and Mr. Andrews. Tell me more about your response, second time being impeached, unprecedented in history. Enough shame, or the purpose is different? Professor Laris, your observation.
Yes, no, that is a serious matter, of course, but the crime he has been convicted of, insurrection, is even more serious. You know, it's unheard of that a mob of supporters, encouraged by the sitting president, storms the Capitol building, the seat of democracy in the United States. And of course he had to be impeached. You know, what else would you do with such a crime committed? So something like that had to happen. The problem only is that Trump is at the end of his term, so the problem is, when will the Senate actually try to convict him and have the trial in the Senate? And that, of course, causes a lot of problem for the incoming president.
Right. Only 3 presidents, of course, were impeached in the U.S. history. We'll take a look at this. The first was Andrew Johnson back in 1868. The second, Bill Clinton, 1998. Donald Trump is the third to be impeached, but he's the first and the only U.S. president so far to be impeached twice. Now, Mr. Andrews, I know you are also a Republican. Tell me more about what does it mean for the party? After all, he's the one coming from this party.
Sure. I worked in the United States Senate for over 5 years, went through security with Capitol Police every day, found them to be incredible men and women serving the country, and was certainly dismayed to hear and to see the attack on the Capitol. Now, when it comes to the party, if you think about it, this was actually a perfect setup for the party to have a clean break from Donald Trump and Trumpism, but they chose differently. Here's what the party should have done. Trump called for this mob. The mob attacks the Capitol building. Members of the U.S. Congress and Senate, their lives are put at risk. No Republican should have voted against certification. Then the same week, we had the RNC winter meetings where new leadership was being elected. The same leaders that have enabled Donald Trump and dissembled, etc., supported his supporters, were reelected. And then this week, we had an impeachment vote where everyone seemingly across the world agrees that this vote is appropriate, but we only had 10 Republicans, and the one Republican in leadership who voted for impeachment,
Right.
there's a call for her to be removed from leadership. And so Republicans have had a perfect opportunity to have a clean break from Donald Trump. They've chosen not to do it, and so what that means for the party moving forward is, I believe the party has delegitimized itself in the minds and hearts of a lot of people, and we have to move on from the Republican Party as we know it. I don't think that this version of the GOP is sustainable. I don't think it can hold a coalition together. And beyond that, I think it's a threat to democracy because leaders refuse to make the right decision, even when their own lives have been put at risk, and even when the decision to impeach has been de-risked so significantly by the attack that we saw on the Capitol. So Republicans haven't made the right decisions, and it's time for a change.
But Mr. Andrews, if you said if their lives are already being threatened, and there has been strong cause for these Republicans to vote for the impeachment, but why they didn't do it? Now, they're smart people, so what do you think are the reasons? Very briefly, please.
Well, right. One of the reasons given is they don't want further dissension in the United States. They think that this impeachment, that the trial will further divide the country. The other reason is they believe that Democrats want to use impeachment and want to use the association with Donald Trump as a political cudgel to beat Republicans over the head with, and that they want to take the 74 million people that voted for Trump and lump them in with the people that attacked the Capitol. I don't think either of those arguments are strong, but those are the arguments that are being made in terms of Republicans not voting for impeachment.
Professor Laris, with your observation, I know you are coming more from a European perspective, your observation of what is the nature now that's going on about the impeachment, and also the different parties, particularly of the Republican Party, choosing their position. Is it more about partisan lines, or is it more about what they fundamentally believe is correct for the country moving forward?
Yeah, let me first say that the allies in Europe are deeply worried about what is going on in the United States. It was expected that after the turmoil of the Trump years, that, with Biden coming in, a more center politician, a more reasonable politician, that stability and predictability would come back to alliance relations and to American foreign policy. With now the impeachment process going into the Biden years, that seems not to be the case, at least initially, and they are deeply worried about that continuing turmoil in the United States. And I think the United States itself and many people in the United States are worried that the Biden administration cannot have a proper start, that it will be outflanked by the attention still put on Donald Trump and the impeachment process. And what is really expected of the Senate here is that the Senate needs to do some multitasking, that it needs to deal with the Biden agenda, pass that huge economic bill, deal with the coronavirus crisis, of course, which is still running wild in the United States, and also confirm the cabinet officers for the new Biden administration. The Secretary of State, the Secretary of Defense, Homeland Security Secretary, the CIA Director, all these people need to be confirmed by the Senate. And Biden has the right to have a proper cabinet in place on the day of inauguration, or really very, very shortly afterwards. And of course, if you have a trial in the Senate about Donald Trump, that may not be easily possible. And all the attention of the world, of the United States, will still be on Donald Trump. And what Donald Trump really relishes above all is attention. He wants to be in the middle of attention.
All right.
And somehow that needs to be avoided. And one suggestion would be, if I can just say that, not to immediately start the trial in the Senate, but perhaps wait a month or even the first 100 days during the Biden administration, and only start the trial after a delay, so that Biden can settle in and not all the attention will continue to be on Trump and the accompanying turmoil which will go with it.
However, according to the Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, that is exactly what's going to happen. The trial is likely to happen in the afternoon of the 20th, which is almost in the middle of these transition and inauguration ceremonies and events. So, Mr. Yang, you've been working in Washington for years. What do you make of this unprecedented situation, and how are you looking at the nature of things?
Well, I think, in my observation, the course of the impeachment, the second impeachment against Trump, the course is more important than the results, simply because he is leaving, and also because the threshold is pretty high, two-thirds. So I don't think the Senate will pass the impeachment by two-thirds. However, the course will really reduce, if not remove, Trump's influences, not only among the grass tops, but also among the grassroots. But furthermore, the course will really damage.
You mean the trial itself?
Yeah,
in the
trial.
Senate?
Yeah. Actually, target at Trump, but also damage the Republicans' reputation. So this course, besides the legal meeting, it's a political course. But the side product is, in my view, that will deepen the political division among the public. So that's really concerned by coming President Joe Biden, who has spoken a very sophisticated message about that.
Well, this is exactly what President-elect Biden said in a statement after the vote, that it was his hope the Senate leadership, quote, will find a way to deal with their constitutional responsibilities on impeachment while also working on the other urgent business of this nation. Now, Mr. Andrews, we know that President-elect Biden already come up with his 1.9 trillion yuan, $1 trillion rather, a plan for both economic recovery and also vaccines, pandemic prevention control. Now, this needs a lot of political momentum. Will the Trump trial, if it happens, and happens early, be able to sideline so that political discussions about 1.9 trillion will be sailing along? Is it going to happen?
I think the one thing that can be done to bring unity both in the country and in the United States Congress more generally is to move forward quickly with the impeachment of Donald Trump, get the trial out of the way, have the vote happen, and then move forward with the other business. I think the longer there's a delay in terms of the impeachment trial, the more Republicans will say, well, this is in the past. Why are Democrats bringing up something that is in the past? It's time for everybody to move on. And the worry is that there won't be actual repercussions.
So actually, you do not agree with Professor Larry's. It seems to me that the trial should happen a month from now, later, but rather it should be ASAP, right? Is that what you're saying?
I think that's exactly what I'm saying, because I think the longer we wait, the more Republicans and folks that are supporters of Donald Trump will say, that's in the past, let's move on, let's move forward, clean slate, without there actually being repercussions. And if there aren't repercussions, then this kind of thing could potentially happen again, because the party, again, hasn't shown that it has the ability to police itself. So it needs to be policed by others, i.e. this impeachment moving forward, and there being political consequences.
Mr. Andrews, the parties might want to give the others the image that it would be able to police itself. However, what if chaos also flared up after the impeachment, or rather the trial in the Senate begins? Will that further complicate Mr. Biden's coming into the office? Mr. Andrews.
Yeah, I served on the Presidential Inaugural Committee, both as a U.S. Senate staffer and then as a campaign staffer for a couple of inaugurations. I've actually sat on the dais and looked out into a crowd of 1 million people on the National Mall. It's a beautiful moment, and it's so disheartening to know that because of these security concerns, that moment won't happen in the same way this year. So there will be, whether the impeachment moves forward or not, a change in terms of the way the transition of power happens. There will be folks coming into Washington, D.C. who want to do bad things. However, we can't let that stop us from moving forward with this, what I think is immediate need to get this impeachment done and then get on to the other business of the nation. You're absolutely right. Whether it's small businesses that need additional assistance, whether it's everyday folks that have lost jobs, whether it's folks that stand to be kicked out because they can't pay their rent, whether it's the pandemic and making sure we're getting vaccines. There's a lot of stuff that needs to be done, but impeachment is the number one thing. And I think any delay is just going to muddle it and make it more difficult to actually move forward.
Professor Larry, one of the things people have been thinking about is whether the impeachment taking place in the House and possibly the trial at the Senate will be able to bring more momentum to the president-elect when he comes into the office and be able to let him rally more crowd into support for his future policy and for himself as well. After all, he was elected because people are against Trump, so they choose the other. So, Professor Larry, do you think that will happen, or is too much to predict at this moment still?
Yeah. It cannot be entirely excluded, of course, but I would say that an impeachment trial will distract the Biden administration. As I just said, all the attention will continue to be focused on Donald Trump and Biden's electoral program and the economy and the virus, the defeat of the virus, the distribution of the vaccine. All that will suddenly be less important to the general public because everyone loves to see Donald Trump being convicted by the Senate, at least a certain number of people, and so a lot of attention will be on him. But I think the danger of going forward too quickly with impeachment is that Donald Trump will actually not be convicted. That the Senate, which is 50-50, that a two-third majority is needed. At least I think 17 Republicans need to vote for impeachment. If they do not vote for impeachment and Donald Trump is not convicted, what does that tell the American people and the world? That a crime committed, an insurrection by the sitting president, goes basically free of conviction. And I think if we wait a little bit, perhaps 100 days, we also obtain more information on what actually was going on. And at the moment, all our information is still very vague and opaque. We don't really know what went on, both inside the Capitol building and also whether the White House was implicated, whether Republican congressmen and congresswomen and senators were implicated in that insurrection. So a little bit more time would give us more information and may actually it would actually lead to a conviction in the Senate by Donald Trump.
The latest news, of course, the relevant department of the governments have been looking into what really happened at the Capitol, and not much results yet so far. So, Mr. Yang, to you here sitting in Beijing, of course, what's going on inside the U.S. Capitol appalled the rest of the world, even appalled many Americans as well.
Oh, yes.
But from your perspective, do you think Biden administration coming into power with the uncertainties of a trial, will that make him more be able to concentrate on foreign policy, which is also one of the areas that President Trump definitely left his legacy, quote unquote, a very different approach compared to all the other U.S. presidents in history?
Yeah. Let me put it this way. Firstly, as a foreign observer, I think the Biden administration will put most of the resources and intention into the domestic policy rather than foreign policy. And secondly, it's really, really hard for Biden administration to implement all the four tasks he said, like pandemic, economy, racial problems, and environment, simply because the impeachment will really be the focus at the very first phase of the administration. And thirdly, I don't think the insurrection on the Capitol Hill is an incident. It's a part of a movement. The movement could be stopped, but the source of the movement, the Trumpism, will continue to expansion. So I think, in short, now the United States is at crossroads of history. The country should go leftward or rightward, like leftward like Democrats want, or rightward like Republicans want. So such a division will continue to deepen. That is the biggest challenge among all challenges facing the U.S. government.
So it is, of course, a little bit far away from the U.S. Capitol for all of us to predict what's going to happen. But one thing many are looking at the United States is whether it will be able to pick itself up from the earlier chaos and be able to concentrate on some of the urgent tasks. With that, I want to ask you, Mr. Andrews, do you think there is enough consensus to do it now?
Yeah, the democratic norms are still in place. Whether or not there's consensus on specific solid policy positions, so whether or not Republicans and Democrats in the House and Senate fully agree with President-elect Biden's $1.9 trillion package, is less important than the fact that there's a demand from Americans across the political spectrum for movement on these very pressing issues. Again, whether it is small businesses that need assistance, whether it's everyday people that need unemployment insurance or that need to be prevented from being kicked out because they can't pay their rent, there's a push from constituents to not only provide some kind of some kind of feedback in terms of impeachment, but to also address some of these issues. And in the foreign affairs space, yes, domestic policy is going to take precedent, but Joe Biden has put together a foreign affairs team, Catherine Tai, as the U.S. Trade Representative, and so you have to think that moving forward into February and March, that the Phase 2 negotiations will move forward. Tony Blinken has talked about putting together international coalitions to make sure that the U.S. can kind of take back some of its positive influence in terms of international policy. So those things are going to move forward as well. But the other guest is absolutely right that domestic policy will be the primary thing, and that'll be driven by everyday people saying we need assistance here.
Right. Whether the Biden administration in the early days will be putting out things quite fast, it's still unclear. Professor Lara is observing it from Washington earlier. I'm sure you noticed President Trump, when he came into the office on the very first day of his inauguration, he's already using his presidential power. Now, there are certainly a lot of space for the new U.S. president to use his presidential power because he did want to turn a lot of things back from the earlier path of the previous administration. Do you see that's likely to happen with the impeachment trial likely to taking place in Senate sooner or later?
Well, it will be a distraction, but of course Joe Biden is a very experienced politician, almost 50 years in government or in office in some way or other. And he has very experienced cabinet officers who also have been in government or in office for a significant period of time, are very experienced. So I think Joe Biden will do his utmost not to be too distracted by any impeachment. And he also has the intention to cooperate, both internally to bring the country together, but also outside. He wants to have a more cooperative style in foreign affairs. And that regards both allies and also foes and rivals.
Right.
And I think we will see significant change to what went on under Trump. And also let me say, on the whole, I'm optimistic. American democracy has proven to be resilient. After all, the insurrection did not succeed, and Joe Biden was certified and will be inaugurated. So on the whole, I think perhaps we should not be too distracted by the turmoil and chaos created by Trump and be a little bit optimistic about the future. And I do think that we will see a better world with the inauguration of Joe Biden.
Okay, a lot of confidence has been expressed, but we will probably have to wait and see what exactly is going to happen. Sometime hope will come true.
Absolutely.
Sometime it's different. Mr. Yang, your final words before we wrap it up.
Well, I think the U.S. This incident or movement really give a lesson not only for the United States but also for the world. And President Trump made a great point by the latest say violence deconstruction has no place in the United States. I hope, sincerely hope, this point can be recognized as a universal rule by American politicians.
Right. Hopefully also by President Trump himself after he said that. Thank you so much for the three of you joining us. Klaus Laris, Brandon Andrews, Yang Xiyu. Really appreciate it. Thank you, gentlemen.